This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Mali's interim president to be sworn in this Friday to serve an 18-month term. African leaders call for $300 billion in financial aid over a 3-year period. And around 2,000 Ethiopians charged in connection to Oromia clashes. Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you're joining us. This is Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, Egypt achieves a record production of 64,500 barrels of oil. And in sports, ex-navigator George Mwangi recounts Safari Rally's magical days as the event returns to the WRC next year. We begin the hour in Mali, where the country's interim president is set to be inaugurated this Friday. Ba Ndao, a former defense minister, will serve as interim president for 18 months. Former Nigerian president and Equos envoy Goodluck Jonathan is in the country for the latest round of talks. Jonathan has hinted at the possibility of Equos lifting its sanctions. The Equos sanctions followed a military mutiny which led to the forced resignation of then-President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Among the conditions to lift the sanctions was the appointment of a civilian to head the transition. Well, we're now joined by Mohamed Salaha, a Malian journalist based in Bamako, and Achike Chude, an African affairs analyst based in Lagos, Nigeria, for more on this story. Mohamed, I'll begin with you. Mali's new president is, as we heard, expected to be sworn into office later today. What's the mood like on the ground at the moment?
The mood on the ground is rather jovial. At the entrance of the hall, which the president and the vice president will swear, an important security is deployed. Invite guests are attending this ceremony. Most of Malians are following the ceremony live from the national TV. It's also a kind of hope because Malians want to move forward. Today marks the beginning of the transition in Mali, which Malians were waiting, and the choice of Ba Ndao as president has an impact on Malian view because Malians know about his integrity, his honesty, and his rigor. So all eyes are now on next after the takeoff of the president and the vice president. Malians are waiting now for the nomination of the prime minister in the next coming days.
All right, Achike, coming to you now. The junta have appointed a former defense minister as an interim president. Will the move now meet the demand by ECOWAS that a civilian head the Malian government, and are we now likely to see economic sanctions lifted?
Yeah, I guess right now everybody is happy with the situation, and it seems to be a win-win situation for everybody. The Malian people are happy; they have had their wishes granted. The ECOWAS obviously is happy that diplomacy has triumphed at the end of the day. Their conditions have been met, and for the military junta, they have been able to save their face. Save face to some extent, and so. One of the key demands before now is that the Malian people, and Mali as a country, we return back to the path of democratization. And this is the critical part of that democratization process. The appointment of an interim president has been accomplished. And I think, in fact, the sanctions imposed on Mali have been hanging on this, making sure that the military complied with the demands and the conditions of ECOWAS. So now that that has been met, I think Equos was, in the very first instance, was not happy imposing sanctions on Mali. The essence of of the sanctions was to bring about this situation that is now evolving in Mali. So I want to believe that they will be looking for means and ways to ensure that the sanctions that have been imposed on the people of Mali and the country will be lifted. It is not of any benefit to anybody, neither to Equos or the Malian people. So as soon as some other things are in place, I'm sure that the sanctions will be lifted any moment from now in a matter of days. That is what I see happening. They have no choice. Like I said, it's a win-win situation for everybody.
And Mohammed, now coming back to you in Bamako, the opposition had initially opposed a plan to appoint a military officer as an interim president. Are they now satisfied with the appointment of Ndao as the interim president?
Most of Malians agreed.
Well, we do seem to have lost Mohammed there. Achike, let me just come back to you for the final question. How important is it to the wider region and ECOWAS in particular for Mali to have peace?
Well, I think the importance of peace in Mali and in any part of the sub-region was underscored by the very fact that ECOWAS embarked on this diplomacy. Because ultimately, it's about ensuring that Mali will not slide further into crisis. And I think they have succeeded to a very large extent. But again, this is all about a process. And so this is just a critical part of the process to rebuilding Mali. First of all, ensure that you have peace. Then with peace will come discussions about development, what to do about the economy, what to do about the insurrection, because you see there is still an insurrection going on in other parts of Mali. We must not forget that large swaths of Malian territory are still in the hands of insurgents and terrorists, and so the Mali needed that consensus among Malians to come together first, to unify in order to confront together the common challenges that are plaguing Malian security. And that is to take on now with hopefully all the resources at their disposal, with the unity of the people, and then now take on the challenges, the security challenges, to ensure that peace is brought back to Mali. With that peace would now come other aspects of building up the Malian society, development in the economy, provisions of jobs for the people of Mali, and some of the other socio-economic contradictions that have plagued Mali for years. So peace is essential, and the ECOWAS region has shown how important peace is. That is why they have committed so much time and resources to ensure that we get to this process.
All right, Achike, thank you very much for that. We'll leave it there for now. African Affairs analyst Achike Chude joining us live from Lagos, as well as Mohammed Salaha, a journalist in Bamako. Let's now turn to the UN General Assembly. Leaders from across the world have been addressing the Assembly through pre-recorded messages due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For the third day, African leaders took a united stance in calling for better financial support as they battle the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Astatal has the details.
The United Nations General Assembly brings together the world's leaders. African heads of state took advantage of this platform, calling for fiscal measures to help their economy survive the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. They estimate that Africa will need $100 billion in annual aid over the next 3 years.
I call on all Africa's partners to take bolder measures to relieve our economies, which have been severely affected by the effects of COVID-19. The financial needs of Africa has been assessed at $100 billion US annually over a 3-year period, or a total of $300 billion US.
The issue of a debt moratorium was also raised. While President Alassane Ouattara called for an extension of the G20 debt moratorium, others urged for debt cancellation.
Given the current state of urgency, our countries require and need financial support that is on the same level as the economic crisis that they are experiencing. A simple moratorium. A debt moratorium is not sufficient given the challenges before us. We need to purely and simply cancel this debt and think up and implement a new paradigm to meet the development needs of the poorest countries.
pour prendre en charge les besoins de développement.
African leaders are not the only ones making the call for further financial assistance. In June, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed for a global response package. He added that for Africa, this meant more than $200 billion in support from the international community. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, still in New York, the head of Libya's internationally recognized government has called on rival forces to lay down their weapons, warning that they risked compromising a fragile ceasefire in the country. In his address from Tripoli, the Government of National Accord leader also said he's ready for negotiations that would restore peace in Libya. CGTN's Wanja Mungai reports.
Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj has appealed to the United Nations for support during upcoming elections. He made the plea at the ongoing United Nations General Assembly.
We call for an agreement on a constitutional foundation and to organize presidential and parliamentary elections. We look forward to strong international support in this regard and contribution of the United Nations to provide the requirements for successful election, an election that the Libyans have waited for too long.
This comes at a time when the North African nation is caught up in fighting between two rival factions. That's the internationally recognized Government of National Accord and rival Libyan National Army led by General Khalifa Haftar. Al-Sarraj's GNA is based in the capital Tripoli, while Haftar's faction controls most of eastern Libya. In his remarks, the leader says dialogue among all relevant actors will be necessary in realization of peace in the oil-rich country.
And to reach this goal, we find it necessary to resume political dialogue and to include all real actors on the ground, all political factions and parties, all regions and all social segments, regardless of affiliation or ideology. The only exception would be anyone whose crimes have been legally proven and who has spilled Libyan blood.
The national government has recorded victories against its rival recently. In June this year, al-Sarraj's faction with Turkish support managed to push back the LNA from an offensive on the capital Tripoli.
We fulfilled our promise when we said the invader will not enter Tripoli. On April 4th last year, the city remained resilient in the face of a tyrannical attack led by the aggressor and the militias that support him. The resulting human and material loss are too much to enumerate here.
Last week, the renegade commander Haftar announced a resumption of oil production that had stalled for months. Libya's conflict began in 2012 when a NATO-backed uprising led to the fall and death of longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. The country has since become a transit route for migrants seeking greener pastures in Europe. But mistreatment of the migrants has caused uproar from activists. In his speech, the Libyan premier defended his country.
Libya is a victim of migration and not its reason. Accordingly, we reaffirm that the ideal solution is to address the root causes of migration. The international community must assist the countries of origin and encourage them to implement real development programs and improve the sector's performance.
It is hoped that the presidential and parliamentary elections planned for next year will strengthen democracy in war-torn Libya. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa has also addressed the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. In his remarks, he condemned sanctions against his country. In his pre-recorded speech, Mnangagwa also said his country was now on a new path.
Your Excellencies, Zimbabwe is on a new path. Like other nations in the region, we are facing humanitarian challenges, which in our case have been worsened by the illegal sanctions, the negative impact of climate change, and compounded by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, humanity is at a crossroads as we are confronted by complex challenges that do not respect any borders. Multilateralism is under increasing threat from the blind pursuit of narrow interests. We must therefore strengthen international amity and goodwill, as well as uphold mutual respect and observe the sovereign equality of states.
Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping was also among the leaders who addressed the UN General Assembly. In his video speech, the Chinese president once again touched on the importance of multilateralism. We headed to South Africa to get some reactions to his remarks and on China's role in the global economy.
China and Africa also share the need for multilateralism and respect for multilateralism. I think it's an understanding that together, collectively, we can do much better in dealing with the challenges that we face as a humanity. As we face the pandemic, there is a need for a common collective response in dealing with the pandemic.
One can only welcome the approach taken by China as opposed to the isolationist approach being adopted by the United States at the moment, because China's approach is much more constructive and conducive towards a continuation of the trend of globalization that has been at the heart of the growth of the world economy over the last 4 or 5 decades, and especially the experience of emerging markets which have benefited enormously from the opening up of the world economy to China, and which has resulted in a demand for raw materials from many of these emerging markets, which has helped to sustain their progress. China has been singularly one of the most successful countries in the world in terms of achieving poverty reduction. The extent of the reduction in poverty brought about in China over the last 25 years has been nothing short of remarkable, and is an example that many countries would like to pursue.
South Sudan's government is warning of famine due to flooding in parts of the country. The government says heavy rains have now displaced more than 1 million people while washing away crops and killing livestock. CGTN's Patrick Oyet now reports.
Rain is devastating residents in the greater Upper Nile, parts of Equatoria and Bahr Ghazal regions of South Sudan. Villages, schools, hospitals and markets have been submerged. Livestock has been washed away. Residents are left with almost nothing, and rain is still continuing.
We have nothing left here, no food, everything is washed away by water. We don't even have clean water, nowhere to go. The government should help us, otherwise we will die here of hunger.
South Sudan's government says it is short of funds due to the economic shock from the pandemic. The country's Relief and Rehabilitation Commission says it has a plan to handle flooding problems in future, but for now it is urging aid agencies to provide humanitarian assistance to those displaced as a result of the flooding.
In the future, we may call upon the government to devise a better way of designing better dikes that can be supported by both partners and the government so that we can reduce the impacts that will come in the future. We also think that there are other areas that need boats, motorized boats, and we are calling for more resources to be put across.
The United Nations says over 1 million South Sudanese people are now displaced by the floods. The UN says almost half the country is already flooded, and even if rain stops, its impact would mean many will depend on food aid for a long time. The UN and other humanitarian agencies are pledging to work together to improve the humanitarian situation, but the aid agencies need more funds.
We cannot stop delivering other essential services. We need to continue delivering health services, basic health services. We need to continue to deliver water and sanitation. We need to provide livelihood and food security. And more importantly, we need to continue to fight with the flooding situation that we are facing.
Experts are warning that rains are expected to continue until November. Many residents here will remain displaced. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Stay with us here on Africa Live as we take a short break. Here's what's coming up on the program. Around 2,000 Ethiopians charged in connection to Oromia clashes. And plastic surgery on the rise as South Africa eases coronavirus restrictions.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Now, Ethiopian authorities have charged around 2,000 people. The charges are in connection with the violence which erupted in the country's Oromia region. Intercommunal clashes took place in June following the death of a popular Oromo singer there.
The current figure we have is above 2,000 suspects are being charged for their participation in the violence that has taken place in the Oromia regional state. Some of the suspects, some of the accused are politicians, but they are not being charged for their political activity. They are being charged for their acts.
Let's turn to South Africa, where the country is seeing an increase in demand for cosmetic surgeries as the coronavirus epidemic eases. All non-essential procedures were cancelled for several months as health facilities were swamped with COVID-19 patients. But as the country opens up further, patients are now flooding back. CGTN's Julie Shire now reports.
COVID-19 put a halt on all cosmetic and non-emergency operations in South Africa. As the pandemic slows, reconstructive and plastic surgeon Dr. Sadia Lahir says she's seen a rapid influx of patients at her Johannesburg practice.
Certainly in my practice, breast surgeries are still very popular, and that includes both breast reduction procedures as well as breast augmentation procedures. There are the body contouring, your abdominoplasties, especially with mums and people who have lost a lot of weight. And then you get the odd facial procedures.
I had to get some skin cancer removed from my shoulder. It was a type of sarcoma that had to get removed, and they took out a 5 centimeter chunk of skin from my shoulder, and now it's pretty much healing up very well. So I had the staples removed today. It was quite a stressful time, especially when going into a hospital. You're not allowed to see family or have anybody visit you.
South Africa has a reputation for being a top-notch cosmetic surgery destination. Lahir is confident that numbers will pick up when borders are open in October.
I certainly have been involved in treating many patients on our African continent that come here for both cosmetic and reconstructive work. South Africa has been a center of excellence for complex cases, and we have certainly pre-lockdown treated many patients across Africa. So we would love to see a return to a bit of normality and have our patient base back as well.
While fears over the virus slowly dissipates, there is concern that vital appointments, especially among oncology patients, are being missed.
My colleagues have said that they're seeing really advanced state of disease now. In other words, people who were sick and were ill and did need to come to hospital but were too scared to come because of COVID. If you've got a serious condition, it's perfectly safe to come back now and have it treated.
There is a screening procedure in place in all hospitals. Once the patient comes through and they have decided on an operation, every patient has a screening COVID-19 swab 48 hours before their surgery. That allows us to keep patients as safe as we can in terms of different areas in the hospital.
Health services were severely disrupted during the winter months when there was a peak in COVID-19 infections. But as summer sets in, there is hope they will stabilize. Judy Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Elsewhere, China's State Council has briefed the media on the latest research and development into a COVID-19 vaccine. A leading expert says data shows China's vaccine may have a long-term protective effect.
We are seeing some positive results. China's earliest vaccine recipients were inoculated about 7 months ago. Serum tests show that they still have a relatively high level of antibodies. This means that these vaccines may provide a relatively long period of protection.
Well, the authorities say China's Science and Technology Circle has been taking vaccine research and development as a priority in COVID-19 response efforts. They say experts have been focusing on 5 types of vaccines and 12 competitive teams have participated in China's joint vaccine program. All of them have followed strict laws and regulations. They also say 4 China-developed vaccines have been approved by foreign countries and entered the final stage of human trials overseas. Well, with the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 surpassing 200,000, health officials are working to try to keep the pandemic in check. A new phone app that alerts people of possible exposure to the virus offers some promise. Several states across the country are adopting the platform created by Apple in partnership with Google, and more are expected to follow suit. CGTN's Hendrik Sibrandi now reports.
For months now, health officials have tried to use contact tracing to alert those who've been around COVID-19 positive people so that they too can get tested for the coronavirus.
It's my impression that most of the people who have become sick with COVID want to be a part of making sure their friends and family don't also get sick.
And click turn on.
Now that approach is being taken a step further with this exposure notifications app, which tells folks who download and enable it on their smartphones that they may have been exposed to those with COVID-19.
Kind of a complicated concept, so bear with me.
Sarah Thunberg with the state of Colorado says the app allows phones to communicate with each other via Bluetooth whenever their owners are within 6 feet of each other for at least 10 minutes. Random sets of letters and numbers called tokens are shared.
There's no other information that's exchanged. Not location, not name, not health status.
If someone tests positive for COVID-19, they enter a key into their phone which activates all tokens shared in the previous 14 days. A push notification is sent out. Asymptomatic people in particular could get an important heads up.
My phone can alert your phone that you might want to get tested.
The app is called EN Express in Colorado. It was developed in partnership with Apple and Google for use on Android phones and iPhones. While not a game changer,
that's a strong word to use.
Indrajit Ray, a computer expert at Colorado State University, says it appears to be a secure, privacy-protected way to enhance more traditional contact tracing.
In the ideal setup, yes, this is going to, work very well, assuming that everybody has opted in.
That may be an optimistic assumption. Many Americans have resisted measures to clamp down on the coronavirus.
It's just a flu virus, that's all it is.
Other countries have used this notification app for a while.
Somewhere between 30 and 50% of people in Ireland use this kind of functionality, have it turned on and engaged on their phone.
Thunberg says measuring the app's success in limiting the virus spread will be challenging, but at this point she believes it can't hurt in the effort.
Why not get your phone in the fight? You have one. Why not do it?
It's definitely one step forward, and it will help us manage this COVID much better.
An ad campaign will notify Coloradans about the app as it goes online in the next few weeks. Hendrik Sibrandi, CGTN, Denver.
Well, staying in the U.S., where the Senate has passed a resolution reaffirming their commitment to a peaceful transition of power. This comes a day after President Donald Trump refused to make the commitment if he loses the November presidential election. Trump has repeated claims that mail-in ballots would lead to massive voter fraud for months, and he says he expects his battle with Democrat Joe Biden to be settled by the Supreme Court. Polls suggest that Trump is trailing Biden nationally by 10 points. Surveys show tight races in a number of key battleground states. CGTN's Jim Spellman now reports.
President Trump is raising doubts about whether he'll accept the results of November's election. He made these comments when asked a simple question: win, lose, or draw, would he commit to the peaceful transfer of power after November's election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation.
President Trump has tried to cast doubt on the legitimacy of mail-in voting, which has been expanded in some states due to COVID-19. There is no evidence to back up his claims that mail-in voting will lead to massive voter fraud. The Atlantic reports President Trump's legal team is preparing to fight election results that don't go his way through Republican-controlled state legislatures. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden responded to Trump's remarks.
I said, what country are we in? Look, he says the most irrational things. I don't know what to say about it, but it does surprise me.
These what-if scenarios may seem far-fetched, but the Biden campaign is taking them seriously, assembling a team of lawyers and a legal war room ready to defend the legitimacy of mail-in ballots in court. Trump is behind in most polls. As he paid his respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the Supreme Court, he faced boos and chants of vote him out from mourners grieving the Supreme Court justice who died last week. On Saturday, President Trump is set to name his nominee to replace Ginsburg. He says that nominee will be a woman. A heated confirmation battle is likely to follow. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Bethesda, Maryland.
Well, it's time for us to take another short break, but don't go anywhere. Here's what's coming up in the business. Egypt achieves a record production of 64,500 barrels of oil. And businesses in South Sudan feel the pinch as inflation soars.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Welcome back onto the business now. The government in Nigeria has approved a sum of $1.96 billion to construct a new rail line linking Nigeria with the Republic of Niger. The 248-kilometer rail line is expected to run from the northern states of Kano and Katsina in Nigeria and link the city of Maradi in Niger. The decision was announced after the weekly Federal Executive Council meeting chaired by President Muhammadu Buhari and attended by cabinet ministers in the capital, Abuja. It is projected that when completed, the rail line would assist the supply of crude oil from Niger to the refinery being built in the border town between both countries. On to Egypt, where the country has achieved a new record for its crude oil production after it exceeded 64,500 barrels per day for the first time ever, despite the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The North African state has been seeking for years to transform into a regional hub for trade in gas and petroleum and received a major boost last month after the successful discovery of 7 oil fields. CGTN's Yasser Hakim now reports.
Egypt's petroleum sector has faced serious challenges in recent years. From 2010 to 2015, all excavations were suspended due to the unrest from 2 uprisings and the war on terror. The government resorted to importing its energy needs, creating a heavy burden on the budget. But the return of political instability has allowed excavations to resume aggressively with unwavering support from the government to the local and international oil companies. And the improved crude production reflects the success of this strategy.
The production of 64,000 barrels per day is a large amount of crude oil not reached before in Egypt. There are also huge reserves of petroleum and natural gas in the East Mediterranean, the Red Sea and the Western Desert. When extracted, we hope we can cover our total consumption in 2 to 3 years. The latest discovery of crude oil, which is one of the 7 new excavations, is in the South Gulf of Suez. It produces about 2,000 barrels per day, but there are reserves of 70 million barrels ready to be extracted.
But the discovery of natural gas by the North African nation has been the turning point.
We had become self-sufficient in natural gas and stopped imports. This has had a huge effect on the economy and citizens, as we are now able to save billions of dollars every year. The money is spent on improving the quality of life of Egyptians by upgrading services of strategic sectors such as health, education, and infrastructure.
There was a minor setback in activities during the coronavirus lockdown in April. Oil production dropped by about 50,000 barrels per day compared to April 2019 level. But it has rebounded quickly, and the outlook for the petroleum sector is showing promising signs in the months ahead. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Residents in South Sudan's capital are urging their government to come up with measures to control soaring inflation. South Sudan depends almost entirely on oil to finance its budget. However, the recent COVID-19 related plunge in crude prices and supply disruptions has negatively impacted revenue generation. From Juba, here is CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
South Sudan's government has now lifted almost all restrictions put in place due to the coronavirus, but the pandemic pulled oil prices down, the major export commodity for South Sudan. Now the country doesn't have enough foreign currency, yet businesses need to import goods and they need dollars. As a result, commodity prices are rising on a daily basis.
Businesses are opened, schools are opened, but there is no money. The value of our money is gone. The dollar is very expensive. Things are very expensive in the market, yet there's no money. It's as if we are still in a lockdown. There is no money.
The government should have control over the market and prices. Everything is very expensive. When you ask why it's like that, people say it's because of the coronavirus. Prices are not reducing and we are suffering.
Just have a look at these newspapers. The price has gone up and many people are not buying. Money that used to buy 3 newspapers can now buy 1. Things are tough and I don't see a better future soon.
Parts of the country that normally produce food are experiencing the worst flooding the country has ever witnessed. In the capital, Juba, some businesses are now closing their doors.
The Central Bank of South Sudan says its reserves have been depleted due to long years of civil war and the pandemic.
President Salva Kiir appointed a new finance minister and a new head of the country's revenue authority to try and find a solution for the ailing economy.
For the National Revenue Authority to be successful, there is a need for a corresponding success in the other institutions of government, whether it's the Ministry of Finance, whether it's the National Police Services, whether it's the Ministry of Interior, and so forth.
South Sudan's over-dependence on oil means other sources of revenue such as taxation are not properly developed. The country's revenue authority is only a year old and it is overwhelmed with demand to generate the required funds. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Russian Zimbabwean platinum venture Great Dyke Investments has cleared an important hurdle to develop what would be the nation's largest platinum mine. GDI, 50% owned by Russia's V Holding and Zimbabwean investors, said the African Export-Import Bank had completed a due diligence study allowing it to proceed with a $500 million funding program for the Darwindale project's first phase. The JV, which plans to start mining platinum ore in 2021, has already spent $100 million to date on geological exploration and construction of 2 mine portals and surface infrastructure. The $2 billion project, located about 65 kilometers from the capital, Harare, is expected to produce 860,000 ounces of platinum group metals and gold per year at its peak. That would make it the #1 PGM mine in Zimbabwe. Now, in Uganda, the COVID-19 pandemic is devastating the entertainment industry, with many artists finding it hard to fend for themselves. Artists who earn their living from street performances have been particularly affected. While Uganda is easing its COVID-19 lockdown, the entertainment industry is still under restrictions. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga now reports.
Yes, hello, yes, hello, yes, hello, yes, hello.
Deo Kakomo is a musician. He normally earns a living from staging street performances. But due to the COVID-19 restrictions, he can no longer entertain his fans. The Ugandan government banned public gatherings in order to contain the spread of the virus.
COVID-19 has affected my life. It cut off my source of income. As a street performer, I do not have any support.
Before the pandemic, Kakomo earned about $40 a day, but no more. As the Uganda government maintains restrictions on theatre, Kakomo has decided to switch to sand mining in order to fend for his family. But the income is not enough to meet his basic needs.
We now have 1 meal a day, and it's not even a balanced diet.
It's not yet clear when the government will ease restrictions on the entertainment industry. Uganda continues to register a rise in COVID-19 cases. The Uganda National Cultural Center is encouraging artists to use the internet to sell their products.
We've come up with innovations, how we can be able to reach out the audiences where they are online. But of course, there are challenges of data, and the internet is still expensive.
And no one in the industry knows when the lights will be switched back on. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, it's just about time for us to check in on all the day's sports. Here's what's coming up. Ex-navigator George Mwangi recounts the Safari Rally's magical days as the event returns to the WRC next year.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
One, and they're off. Uncle Ryan.
Kicking things off with our Safari Rally special. The last time that the Safari Rally was part of the World Rally Championship, Kenya's George Mwangi was a navigator. After almost 2 decades of absence from the WRC, the rally returns to find him a Kenya Motorsports Federation official. Mwangi reminisces his time calling the notes in the rally fondly. CGTN's Chao Mgono now reports.
George Mwangi is a man who was drawn to the allure of speed and adventure from a young age. Having a father who loved motorsport set him on a path to becoming a rally driver.
I started rally in 1992, but I started with the training rallies, you know, the elementary class, so to speak. And 1994 is when I did my first safari. Rallying, I took it from my dad. He's a former rally driver. He used to do the then East African Safari Rally. And even after he retired, you know, Easter was synonymous with the safari. So even after he retired, we'd go around the route watching the cars. So the bug was in me.
A Kenyan, Ian Duncan, won the safari in 1994 when Mwangi made his debut. It was a long-awaited victory after foreign drivers dominated the event for almost 2 decades.
They were excited. You know that when foreign drivers come and beat us on our home ground, and these are routes that we rally around all around the year, I mean, it's not a good feeling. So we are happy when one of our own wins.
The Duncan victory sparked belief among the local drivers, and Mwangi would then later on navigate Azar Anwar to win the 2006 Safari Rally, in the process becoming the first indigenous Kenyan and African to win the event.
You know, the late Riaz Kulji then was in top form. He was dominating the events, yeah? So as I was, no, George, the competition is too fierce, but I had this feeling in me. And when we won, I reminded him, I told him, as I remember what I told you, he couldn't believe it. He told me, George, what is this? Did you have a vision or something? And even for me, it took time to sink in, you know, because I was like, it was my first win, you know, in a major event. Then it's a safari, history in the history books. It was unreal, you know. You try to pinch yourself and, you know, to confirm whether you're dreaming or not. Yeah, but one of those feelings, you know, you never forget.
Mwangi has not rallied in a while, but his navigator skills are still as sharp as ever and is so brilliantly demonstrated.
When we are doing recce, now we write the pace notes. Now these are detailed, yeah, the road details, what the driver has seen. He tells the navigator and he writes. So we are supposed to do 2 passes. So the first one, the driver is calling the notes, you know, what he can see, as per the tulips. You know, I'm guiding him, hey, here we are turning left, yeah. But so we go into the details, we do the pace notes. Now the second loop, we drive a bit faster, but now me as a co-driver, I'm calling back the notes, what the driver told me. We are confirming the notes. And there are places we'll be, hey, that was a medium, right? No, I don't think it's a medium. I think we need to change that to a fast. Or maybe no, it needs to be a slow corner. So we amend. So by the end of recce, now we are certain that our notes are okay. Come now on Saturday, the day of the event, when I'm calling, the driver knows this is what we wrote.
The last time the Safari Rally was in the WRC calendar, George was navigating. Now, upon its return, he is part of the Kenya Motorsport Federation officials who fought hard to get the event reinstated.
I would say I give credit to our CEO, Mr. Phineas Kimathi. He's really gone around the world, you know, talking to the teams, the FIA officials, WRC officials, you know, telling them, yes, give us a chance, we can do it. We are running one of the top events in Africa, you know, in the ARC. Safari was among the best. And when they came to observe in 2018, they were impressed because, you know, we knew what we had to do and we know our shortcomings and what made us, get kicked out. More so about safety.
Safari Rally's return to the WRC is just a reward for people like Mwangi, who played a part in its rich legacy on and off the tough course. Chamgono, CGTN.
And for more on that, do not miss our weekly sports scene show this Saturday.